Good evening everyone and welcome to another Cyclone Chasers National Cyclone video update. Today the 8th of March 2015. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update sponsored by our major sponsor Campbell Scientific Australia, the business that we trust when measurements matter. If you head to our website at ozcyclonechasers.com.au, you'll find that we have gone on alert. So the OCC team as of 7 PM tonight went on alert. That means that we could be chasing a cyclone. Which one? We're not exactly sure just yet. But it does mean that we now start paying a lot of attention to the next couple of model runs, and then if we need to, we go on to the planning phase, probably around about tomorrow night or early Tuesday. Once we're in the planning phase, we're obviously very confident that a tropical cyclone will affect land and that we can chase it. Beautiful looking active monsoonal surge coming through the maritime continent and into the southwest Pacific. Very, very nice. You can see this fetch here from the North Pacific. These northeasterly trade winds, very strong trade winds, pushing in, crossing the equator, becoming northwesterly monsoonal winds, and feeding into the beast that will become the Fijian or Vanuatu monster. We've also got this this fairly active trough that will spawn a low pressure system here to the northeast of Cooktown. That too is expected at this stage to become a weak tropical cyclone, and we're not exactly sure on intensity yet with this one because it is likely to be a fairly a fairly small system, and with small systems, as Marsha showed us, intensity estimates are very, very difficult. Albeit, what we do know is that the actual environment around that system will not, what we've called the baby cyclone, will not be anywhere near as favourable as it was for Marsha. But as I said, when you do get these little tight, tiny systems, what we call midget cyclones, or fairly small cyclones, maybe not quite midget status, but fairly small cyclones, they can be affected dramatically by the environment around them. And that means dramatic intensification or dramatic weakening, and the computer models are absolutely rubbish at picking up those intensity estimates. Further to the west, while the monsoon isn't as active out here, we are expecting to see a tropical low form to the north of WA as well, to the south of Indonesia. That might create a few problems for a surf life-saving event in the southwestern parts of WA, as well as a big fishing event around Exmouth this weekend. So a lot to get through today, folks. We'll have a look at a satellite image now of exactly what these winds actually look like in terms of their end effect. Thanks to weatherzone.com.au. This is an excellent resource for weather graphics if you're interested in this active phase of weather. Weatherzone.com.au, they offer a free membership option, and their paid membership option is an excellent money well spent service. Over here, folks, this is the area where the WA low will form, and we can already start to see convergence developing. We've got this westerly tracking thunderstorm area, we've got an easterly tracking storm area, and where we're going to see those meet, we're expecting to see a low pressure system form at some stage over the next 48 hours. Now over to the northeastern parts, we've got, look at this activity associated with that monsoon. Remember how I showed you the wind map? This is what happens when those winds rush in from the north and rush in from the south, and right along that trough line. Look at this activity. It's just amazing. Phenomenal activity up here in the Coral Sea, and that continues as we head further to the east. And we see as we track this further to the east just how much convection there really is. So the big monster low that we're watching is happening around about this area here. That will track, at least at this stage, expected to track in a southerly direction. Now we're hoping that it doesn't hit Vanuatu directly, and we're hoping that what most computer models show us is that the monster will travel between Vanuatu and between Fiji. There are outlying models here that do push it straight over the top of Vanuatu. There are outliers that push it over the top of western Fiji. So we're hoping the outliers don't come out in this scenario. We're hoping that the ensemble mean, or the average of all the models put together, is a more accurate track, which would mean that it would have minimal effects or minimal dangerous effects on any of these island nations. And the great news is, and it's only fairly recent news, that the track map from the Fijian Met Bureau on the developing monster has started to push the system a little bit further to the east, but the error margin is massive. We're talking a huge error margin, and if you look at the scale here, you've got an error margin of around about 800 or 600, kilometers here between, between the external or the western edge of that track forecast to the center, and then another 600 from the center to the eastern edge. And not only that, but you've got such a massive difference in the potential forward motion speed of this system as well. The computer models just simply do not agree on this, and unfortunately that's about as good as the Fijian Met Bureau can give you at the moment, just because we've got such poor agreement on the computer models. Now, I don't want to spend too much time on this system because there are probably more important systems to talk about for our Australian viewers, and that's really who we've got to cater this update for. But just be aware that while the track at the moment is going through with the ensemble mean, which means it's going to push somewhere between Vanuatu and Fiji, there is still a massive error margin here, both to the west and to the east, as well as an error margin to the south. The great news out of the model run so far is that the GFS forecast model, the one that has continuously nailed Vanuatu, has now started to push further east as well. And as you can see here, 107 knot system, so we're talking sustained winds of about 200 kilometers an hour. Obviously, wind gusts are about 40% higher than that, so about 280. We're getting very close to Cat 5 status there. And we can see that the system tracks between Vanuatu, which is here where my cursor is, and Fiji, which is here where my cursor is. So both of these island nations have escaped the worst of it, according to the GFS. Let's take a look at some of the others. The UK Met has a bit more of a troubling scenario because the UK Met pushes it pretty well over the western edge of Fiji, and that's very problematic, of course. It has a slightly weaker system, probably high-end Cat 3 or Cat 4 as it goes past. It's important to note, folks, that while it's expected to be a monster, it probably won't hit monster status, which is Cat 5, until it either passes very close to or just after those islands. So it'll still be in an intensification phase as it goes through the island nations or past the island nations, and will probably not hit peak intensity until it starts to be impacted by the upper level trough in around about 6 or 7 days time. The experimental FIM model, once again, a bit of good news for both island nations there. The model pushes it very similar to the GFS. They're based on a fairly similar physics data suit, so we have a situation where the system pushes just to the east of Vanuatu and just to the west of Fiji. Another problematic one here is the NavGem. The NavGem, not a very accurate model, but it pushes a monster system into straight over the top of the most populated island of Fiji. This is the worst case scenario. And the good thing about this is that the NavGem model is not a very accurate computer model. So the chances of this one coming off, pretty slim, but nonetheless it's there and we do need to mention it. And the Euro, as always, is a little less intent on developing it into a crazy intense cyclone. It does develop it into a Cat 2, possibly low end 3, though, by the time it goes past Vanuatu. Remember, once again, with all of these computer models, it's not going to hit peak intensity at this stage until it goes past the islands, not before the islands. That's the general consensus from every single one of them. Even though the track might be off by a few hundred kilometers, the general consensus between the models is that it won't actually hit peak intensity until it's past the major land masses. Now, I guess that's a little bit of a saving grace, but it's not much if you're getting a Cat 4 or high-end 4 or a low-end 5. That's still intensifying coming over the top of you. That's not much consolation. Alrighty, so that's enough about the monster clone. The monster clone's not going to come anywhere near Australia. Don't worry, it's not going to do a 90-degree shift and go from south to west. So there should be nothing for us to worry about from that particular system if you live in Australia. Now, what we do need to worry about is the one here over northern Queensland. Now, what we're going to see at some stage tomorrow is a low-pressure system certainly forming up here to the south of PNG. As we go through the track forecast here, you can see that by around about Wednesday night and into Thursday, the system gets very close to landfall around Cooktown to Cape Melville. Now, don't worry too much about the intensity shown here. Ensemble model guidance intensity is way, way, way underrated. So what happens here is that because maybe a couple or five or 10 models out of the 50 may not pick this up as a strong cyclone, it skews the entire intensity of the system down. So it downplays the intensity. So you're looking here at a weak tropical low, where in fact you're probably more likely to see a weak tropical cyclone instead of a tropical low. Anyway, what we're looking for here is this darker shading area, and we can see that we've got an area there that potentially could see a landfall anywhere from, that's not a landfall there, from around about there to about there. So that's around baby cyclone. That's around where we expect baby cyclone to hit, probably around that Cooktown to Cape Melville area is the favoured location at this stage. Once again, the time frame of that is around about Wednesday night, Thursday. Now on the Euro ensemble, It's been chopping and changing a little bit, but overall, the Euro ensemble keeps this system pretty close to the northeast coast of Queensland, the far northern coast of Queensland, and doesn't really push it too far to the west. And eventually, the system will start to track a little bit more to the southeast. But you can see here, we're looking at the system remaining fairly close to in place here on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Very close to the coast, huge, and I'm talking massive rainfall totals if this system does what the Euro is expecting it to do. We are wow. It'll be very, very interesting to see what the totals will end up being. I don't even want to speculate on what those totals could be. When you combine a tropical air mass with a developing ridge to the south, along that strong convergence line just to the south of this cyclone center, it's going to be big. All right, but anyway, I digress here. I get a bit excited sometimes. Then by around about Monday, the system starts to track a bit to the east. But what you might be able to see here is that by Monday, there's a couple of lows on the Euro ensemble. There's this one, and there's this one. And what we can see there is that perhaps, and there are a couple of models that push this into the Gulf of Carpentaria, while the majority keep this on the close to the coast here, there are a couple that push it into the Gulf. That would be a great case scenario for people that might want some rain inland, but at the moment it's a fairly low percentage probability scenario. We're really looking more at this off the coast of Queensland or just on the coast of Queensland scenario, and then pushing away to the east in the long range. And then, just for a bit of giggles, we'll go and have a look at the extreme long range, and you can see it continues to push east, although some model members then start to push it south back towards the Queensland coast and then make landfall somewhere around the Capricornia to Hervey Bay area. But overall, folks, by that stage, we're looking way too far ahead for it to be credible, especially considering the alternative then would be around about 2,500 kilometres away through inland parts of NT. Alrighty, so Nitso, you've told us approximately what it's not going to be. We don't expect it to be a weak low, so what do we expect it to be? Well, right along landfall at the moment, the majority of model members have it around about a 980 hectopascal system, which is about a Category 1 or a low-end Category 2 on landfall. So we've got basically the lowest model member here is around 980, the highest model member is around 999. So you're looking at the worst, the easiest case scenario, worst case scenario from our chase perspective, easiest case scenario here of the system being a strong monsoonal low, with the obviously favoured scenario of it being a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone being the case here. So that's at 4 days' time. So we're looking here at around about early to midday on Thursday, and then by Thursday night, you can see that the computer model really doesn't want to actually hit land and go west. Most of the computer model members keep this system just offshore, once again at that Category 2 intensity. As we go to the Friday, we see once again the computer model members are fairly good agreement here. Not all of them, but there is reasonable agreement that it will remain very close to that northern coastline and not actually track inland, which is quite interesting, and certainly something that's different in this model than was the case in the Euro, and I'll show you a couple of the others shortly which do have it hitting the coast, moving south a little bit. But even in this scenario, folks, you're looking at a fairly strong ridge pushing up the coast. That strong ridge and that low pressure or tropical cyclone located that close to the coast is going to create heavy, very heavy falls of rain on the North Tropical Coast and Tablelands region, particularly the coast region of that, and also the East Peninsula. And don't forget, you've got a pretty cranking monsoon up here from the north, so you're going to see a lot of rain around the tip of the Cape as well. So for those of you that live around Bamaga, Weipa even, you're going to see a fair bit of rain from this system, even if it doesn't push west into the Gulf. If we start to track it into the future then and into next weekend, we can see the cyclones located here off the coast of northern Queensland starting to push away to the southeast. Now, still expected to be a Cat 2 on most of the computer model guidance. And then the general consensus is that it will continue to move away to the southeast and remain a moderate cyclone, so weak to moderate cyclone. So 10 a.m. Tuesday to 10 a.m. Wednesday, these are precip values from the GFS ensemble forecast model, so it's not just the one model. So be prepared that these are going to be a little underrated. So these are the forecasts in inches over the 24-hour period, and you can see here right where that tropical cyclone is going to lie, that's going to be a very intense period of rainfall there. So basically I find that if you add 50% to these totals is what you actually end up experiencing. So if you're getting, you know, these 4 inches area, which is most of the coast of Queensland, add another 50%, you're looking at 150 mils, so 6 inches over that same period. 10 a.m. Wednesday to 10 a.m. Thursday. Wow, look at all this rain. If you live anywhere north of Townsville, you're getting a lot of rain out of this. And as I said, be prepared that the model is underestimating because it is an ensemble mean. So we are looking at significant rainfall totals closer to the 200mm mark on the coast, possibly even higher than that on that north tropical coast between Townsville and Cairns. And then obviously the very, very high rainfall totals around the Cooktown area and just to the north. Continuing to see fairly heavy rainfall anywhere from around about Ingham northwards on the Thursday and into Friday. And depending on then how far the system starts to push back to the southeast will depend on how much more rain we get on the coast. If it does start to push further east, like some of the guidance was showing, all that heavy rain will start to push east with it. If it remains in place here for a bit longer, we're going to continue to see heavy rainfalls in here as we get into early in the weekend. So if we look at the total precip between now and next Monday across northern Queensland, you can see really anywhere north of about Townsville, maybe even Home Hill area, you're looking at falls of above 100mm for. Remember, as I said, conservative estimates, you'd add at least 50% to these totals here because of the fact that we have a lot of variance in the ensemble members. So, as I mentioned, about 50% on top of what these inches show here. So, you can see here places around Cairns are looking at that 8 to 10 inches mark, so you could probably 50% on that. So, you're looking at 300 to 500 mils for the week. So, you are looking at significant rainfall totals, getting into riverine flooding type fall amounts. So around about the time of landfall, Cooktown, which is about Thursday 10 a.m. at this stage on the computer forecast. Remember, I'm saying Cooktown, this is based on the general consensus. It could be slightly north of there, could be slightly south of there. We're not exactly sure yet. But we can see just fairly solid 30-knot winds, 25 to 30-knot winds, anywhere from around about the Bowen area further to the north into the system. So it's going to be, while it's a fairly small system in terms of its actual inner circulation, it's going to be quite a wide-reaching system in terms of its rain effects and its overall wind effects, because it's guided by it's enhanced by a fairly strong monsoon to the north, and it's also enhanced by a developing ridge to the south. Those two enhancements are the things that are creating such heavy rainfall, not necessarily just where the system makes landfall, but they are creating that heavy rainfall a long way, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kilometres further to the south and further to the north. And you can see, in fact, that we actually see the strongest gradient force winds, particularly to the south, after the system makes landfall Thursday night. We're actually getting gale force winds anywhere north of about Cardwell into the system's core. So we are looking at a significant increase in wind strengths through the week. And I don't need to tell you that. Obviously, it doesn't take Nostradamus to figure that out, and it doesn't take a weatherman to figure it out either, that as a cyclone hits land, the area just to the south and just to the north in the coastal waters becomes really a dangerous place to be. So here's the latest GFS we've got access to. This is just the deterministic forecast. We can see it just stays offshore here. This is why we're on alert at the moment. We're not quite sure if it's going to hit the coast yet. It might just do this little niggling, just meandering near the coast for a while thing. And if it does that, obviously we'll get heavy rain on the coast, but the system is really useless for us from a chase perspective because we can't really get accurate data from it, or good data. We can get accurate data. We just can't get good, worthwhile data if the system doesn't actually cross the coast. The UK Met does cross the coast, significant Cat 1 or 2 tropical cyclone, and then maintains a track just back out here to the east and pops off the coast of Cairns to Cooktown, and once again, as I mentioned, Cat 1 or 2 intensity. The CMC shows an interesting scenario, and it has an eastward moving system. Now, unless we see that in any other computer models, I'm going to discount it. But if we start to see it in some other computer models, we might start to pay attention a bit more to it. The FIM2 has a Category 1 or 2 tropical cyclone making landfall around the around the Cooktown to Cape Melville area. If we take a look at the Bureau of Meteorology's Access G Model 2, it has a very similar type of situation here, coastal crossing at possibly a very weak Category 1 status there on the Access G model. Once again, the Access G model, fairly coarse resolution model, so it may not be picking up intensity very well just because of that fact. The system's fairly small in its actual structure, and therefore it may be overlooked in terms of intensity. So don't be surprised if it has underestimated intensity of this system. But we can see there it crosses the coast around about Thursday morning, and as we go into Friday morning, makes its way into the Western Peninsula, And that's what I meant about a couple of the model outliers showing it going back into the West Peninsula and into the Gulf country. Now we can see here by Saturday morning, it's come back onto the peninsula. This is possibly the biggest rain producing system if it does this. If it goes to the West Peninsula and then ducks back over the peninsula and does this over the course of about 3 or 4 days, we would see falls of getting up to a metre of rainfall in parts of the Queensland coast. Over there, we can see here by Sunday, it's located off the coast of Cairns, once again re-intensifying into a tropical cyclone, and then continues to track eastwards off the coast, and we start to see a decrease in rainfall as it does that. In the 216 to 240 hour time frame, I'm just showing this to you. It does a bit of a stall, but we don't want to go too far like that because of all the volatility in the meantime. All right, if we go out to day 10 here of the expectations in terms of rainfall totals, we can see here a very active phase of, or very active area of rainfall, and that is going to be associated with sneaky cyclone. Sneaky cyclone is expected to track to the south and possibly make landfall here on the northwest Cape region of WA or further to the south as a subtropical system or extratropical system. With an alternate scenario, of course, this always happens. You can't just get all the models agreeing. Obviously, the alternate scenario here is instead of the system tracking here and whacking into the coast, is it tracks here and then continues further to the west. Now, a lot of that will depend on the intensity of the system, the timing of the system, and how strong the upcoming upper level trough is. And that's outside the scope of this broadcast. We're not going to go into that in detail. But you need to be aware that there are alternate scenarios for this. Not every computer model is hitting the northwest coast of WA with this system. And not every model is tipping a coastal crossing around Perth. While some are, most aren't. So, once again, because we have so much disagreement, we need to start looking at the model average. We can't look at... With this thing, a lot of people get into trouble, and look, to be honest, a lot of weather pages get into trouble because they look at individual model runs, and individual model runs can vary by a case of about 2,000 kilometres over 7 to 10 days. And so they get into a lot of trouble because they take that one model run and treat it as gospel. And it's important here at OCC that we do let you know that that is not the way to do cyclone outlooking. With these sort of things, you really need to take a model average, and although the average hardly ever exactly comes off, it's a lot more accurate than taking an individual run that can be completely hit or completely miss. All right, so let's enough gibbering. Let's have a look here. As we go into early morning Tuesday, we have a low pressure center located up here to the north of WA. And if we track the ensemble mean from there, we can see that the system drifts to the south. It doesn't really push southeast. It just drifts to the south or southwest initially there between Tuesday and Wednesday. As the system goes into Thursday, we continue to see that southward or southwestward drift. Now, whether it goes southwards or whether it goes southwestwards, very, very crucial as to whether the system actually hits the coast in the end. Now, what we can see here is that as we go to Friday, continues that southward drift. Now, there are model outliers that do hit the coast by Friday already. And if we continue there to Saturday, we can see that generally the consensus is that it will remain offshore and track away to the southwest. But then by Sunday... Ooh, that's interesting. It pushes quickly to the southeast and weakens. Now, sea surface temperatures out here are not ideal for tropical cyclone formation and the continuation of its energy. So let's take a look at those sea surface temperatures. So if the system remains north or west of the northwest Cape, so this is the northwest Cape region. Now, if the system remains in this area, there's nothing wrong with sea surface temperatures. They will continue to intensify and bomb it out. Assuming, of course, that the environment's favourable. Now, if the system starts to track too far to the west, it gets into this green area. This green area is temperatures of 23 to 25 degrees. Now, no amount of upper level support is going to support a tropical cyclone with temperatures at that level. So it needs to stay in the yellow or above the yellow. So as soon as it tracks past that yellow, it's going to start weakening. It may start to transition into an extratropical cyclone. So that's why we see a shift from a fairly strong cyclone out here to the west of the northwest Cape to a very weak cyclone or extratropical cyclone by the time it starts to push through into the Gascoyne region. And then between Sunday and Monday, the ensemble just just pushes it so fast to the south-southeast. And as I said, it could be lying fairly close to the southwestern parts of WA there in the populated Perth region. Very, very similar ensemble mean track here from the GFS, and you can have a look here that we're expecting that system to track to the south or south-southwest, be very, very close to that Northwest Cape. Look, it's not going to take much for the system to actually hit the Exmouth, Onslow, Barrow Island, getting to Coral Bay. It's not going to take too much motion further to the east to whack into them at full force. But at this stage, all of the guidance is tipping it to remain west of that point. And so we have here the GFS ensemble, which keeps the system fairly well west of that coast until around about the Saturday or Sunday, when it makes a landfall of a weakening tropical cyclone or extra tropical cyclone on that west coast of WA. Big fishing classic thing happening here on the Exmouth region this weekend, and obviously people are going to be very interested in what the winds are going to be, and they're not going to be fantastic at all. We're going to see if the European scenario comes off and the system gets a lot closer to the coast here, which is the general ensemble mean. We would be looking at Exmouth receiving winds of 25 to 40 knots, depending on how close that actual system gets. Obviously, if we get a direct hit, well, you know, the fishing classic won't be happening. But we can see here, even if it gets close, we're looking at very uncomfortable conditions on the water, 25 to 35 knots. And eventually you'll see on the Euro ensemble, if it goes out that far, and you might just be able to make it out there, the circulation ends up crossing the coast around Shark Bay. Over the western regions of WA. But look, that's so far ahead, and don't want to speculate about a landfall just yet. But here's that track forecast, folks. This is from the UK Met model. We can see here the system tracking away in that south to southwest. Now remember, whether it moves south, whether it moves southwest, so crucial as to the intensity and possible landfall location of this system. We can see here that the UK Met adopts a more southward rather than southwestward track, and therefore an intensifying Category 3 system somewhere between 960 and 970 hectopascals is approaching that Northwest Cape region by the 14th of March. Fairly similar track forecast from the CMC computer model. We can see a south-southwest drift here, and the system a bit weaker, 970 to 980 hectopascals, which is a Category 2, maybe weak Category 3, pushing here just to the west of the north, but so close that it's creating havoc for anyone around that region between the 12th to the 14th of March. The FIM computer model has the system drifting away for much further to the west, and in this situation, there would be very little weather impact for the Pilbara. But obviously, we need to be careful. See here, we have that upper level trough. It's holding that upper level, or that cold front and associated upper trough. It's being held back here on the computer model, so it'll be interesting to see as that pushes away to the east or to the southeast, will it get this system and then drag it back in here as a very, very weak cyclone or as a extratropical system? Time will tell. The NavGem 2, also, as I mentioned, one of the least accurate models earlier in the broadcast. It is also showing that more westerly shift here in the guidance, in its guidance. Rainfall, folks, tomorrow, most of it offshore over Queensland, most of it offshore over WA, very little over the NT as a dry air mass takes shape. There is going to be an inland trough, and along that inland trough we'll see isolated showers and storms, possibly some isolated coastal showers across parts of Queensland too. On Tuesday, we have a situation here where some of that rainfall really starts to push onto the coast. 50 to 100 millimetres is the ensemble average. We can see here much heavier falls offshore. Same thing with WA. Not too much actually on the coast. There are going to be isolated showers and storms, but the bulk of the heavy stuff is offshore. As we go to Wednesday, look at these rainfall totals over Queensland. 2 to 300 millimetres possible in 24 hours there. Both, as I mentioned, to the south of the system and where the system ends up getting close to the coast or crossing the coast. So remember, well to the south of the system is going to see heavy rain from this because of the push of the southeasterlies and the convergence of those southeast to northeasterlies, and then also the northwesterlies further to the north of the system. The convergence of those is going to create heavy rainfall as well. Over the WA, you can see this low really developing here Wednesday, and then Thursday starting to track in this south-southwest direction. Could be seeing some of that rainfall pushing onto the West Pilbara coastline and the Gascoyne coastline as well. Obviously, Queensland continuing to see very, very heavy rain, as I mentioned, north of Townsville, possibly again 2 to 300 millimetres, backing up 2 to 300 millimetres the day before. So we are looking at significant rainfall totals developing in this region over the course of the week. It's a long one, I know, folks, but there's not too many times we have to cover 3 cyclones. That's pretty monumental that we have to cover 3, although only 2 are in our area of responsibility. I'm sure a lot of people are interested in the Fijian beast as well. Because we have got a couple of cyclones that will be threatening the Australian coastline over the next week, we will be moving these updates now to nightly, so you will have nightly video updates for subscribers and the general public. Subscribers, you'll also have one in the morning as well to go through any changes in the overnight guidance. So subscribers, you'll be getting 2 per day unless we get on the road. If we get on the road, then everyone's getting 1 per day. Thanks for watching, folks, and to become a subscriber, head to ozcyclonechasers.com.au/subscribe. We will talk again tomorrow night.